Hello, everybody. Welcome to the all-new What You Think Doesn't Matter. Yeah, it's been a while since we dropped anything new, I know, but we didn't go anywhere. We're still alive. We're still kicking. We've just been behind the scenes tearing the whole show down and rebuilding it from the ground up. Why? Well, I'm glad you asked, because the show needed to get sharper, it needed to be cleaner, and in my opinion, needed to be more direct. There's certain sites out there that teach cops how to manipulate loopholes and understand how to apply case law just to make their shit look good. Well, I'm here to teach people or to explain to people how to get away from that, how to prevent the cops from manipulating case law in your situation. Because there's too much noise out there. There's too many people repeating the same tired lines and getting it wrong. That's not what I'm about. So here's what you can expect going forward. We're doubling down on the real talk, actual case breakdowns, deep dives into constitutional rights, and calling out the bullshit when the system bends the rules. On today's episode, that's exactly what I'm going to do. We're going to dig into the Bill of Rights. Not just what it says, but what it means in real-world situations. We're talking about the difference between protected rights and laws, what the Constitution actually limits, and why most people, even some cops and lawyers, don't understand how this shit goes. So if you're here for soft takes and sugar-coated lessons, you're in the wrong spot. But if you want the truth, unfiltered and unapologetic, then you're right where you need to be. So grab your coffee, have a seat, and hang on tight. Let's get going. Just when you thought you knew your rights, here comes a show that's about to blow what you think you know right out of the water. Welcome to What You Think Doesn't Matter, the podcast that dives deep into the real-world impact of your constitutional rights. We're just not talking theory here. We're bringing you 2 decades of experience grounded in real-life know-how and solid education. If you're ready to move beyond what you think you know and actually understand how to stand on your rights when it counts, then you're in the right place. Now grab your coffee, have a seat, and hang on tight. Here's the host of What You Think Doesn't Matter, Chris Thorne. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute any legal advice. The views and opinions expressed are solely those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the views of Showcon Media Productions or any affiliated entities. Showcon Media Productions, the host, and any associated parties are not liable for any decisions made based on this podcast's content. Always consult a qualified professional for your legal needs. For any questions, concerns, or comments, feel free to reach out to the show at wytdm@showconmedia.com. Alrighty, so let's cut through the noise right out the gate here. The show is here for one reason and one reason only, to arm you with the truth about your rights. Not theories, not social media clickbait, not TikTok lawyers who cherry pick half a statute and pretend they're scholars. No. This is about what the law actually says and how it works when the blue lights hit your rearview mirror. Okay? You see, in law enforcement, cops are trained to know the boundaries. You as citizens, you weren't. Unless you've got a background and a degree in that, you don't know how cops are trained for the most part. And that imbalance is done by design. See, the average citizen has no idea what the Fourth Amendment protects. Okay? They think Miranda rights kick in the second they're cuffed. Well, they don't. They think every unjust arrest is illegal. Well, it's not. And they believe the cops are always supposed to play fair. Nope, that's just not how the system is structured. So, this podcast, this is your crash course in how not to get steamrolled. Not by fighting, but by understanding. And one thing that a lot of people really get wrong, they think they know their rights and they want to stand on the side of the street and argue with the cop about why they're being pulled over or why they're being approached. Well, one thing is abundantly clear that a lot of people don't understand, okay? Cops in the real world really don't need a reason to stop and say hi, just like any other stranger on the street. They don't need a reason to stop and just start talking to you. Now, if they start talking to you about a problem or a crime or a suspicion or whatever, then they have to have reasonable suspicion to legally detain you to investigate what's going on. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. But a lot of y'all need to understand that just because you don't agree with what the officer's doing doesn't make what the officer is doing wrong. Period. Are there bad cops out there? Absolutely. But there's more good ones than bad ones. And all you jackasses out there with your cell phones looking to catch the next viral TikTok video are not helping. Period. Everybody's claiming, "Oh, we have a right to, film the law enforcement as they do their jobs." And you're absolutely right. The Supreme Court has held that big time, multiple times. But here's the thing. There's a difference between video recording a public official during their duties and interfering with a lawful investigation or interfering with a police investigation. Okay? So, and it's based on opinion. And I guarantee you, most of the time, that cop's opinion when it comes to court is going to outweigh your opinion when it comes to court. Okay? I mean, I hate to say this, but it's unfortunately becoming very true. In today's justice system, it's not so much about innocent until proven guilty anymore as it is you're guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And I hate that because we've got one of the best justice systems in the world. It's not perfect. It's definitely heavily flawed, especially when politics gets involved. But you guys out there that are trying to hide behind the Constitution to justify your actions are getting it wrong. And that's what this show is about. This show is about teaching you your rights and how to properly apply them in your situation. It's not a catch-all. It's not a dig-out. But it's to tell you, the citizen, what the cops can and can't do and give you the reasons why they're doing what they're doing. And I'll tell you, it's not black and white. Cops live and reside within the gray area of criminal justice. That's where it's at. Every scene, every situation is a judgment call. And sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. But for the most part, they get it right. And when in doubt, they do make calls. And another thing I want to talk a little bit about is all you jackasses out there automatically requesting a supervisor show up to the stop. You know what? It reminds me of inmates' work when I used to be a lieutenant in a prison. The inmates would always piss and moan and bitch when the officers would deal with them and they want to talk to the supervisor. Well, you know what? 9 times out of 10, the supervisor is going to back their officer. Right, wrong, or indifferent. On scene, the supervisor is going to back their cop. You're going to lose that fight. You're going to lose that argument. Your place to argue and to present evidence on your behalf is your court date. That's why they give them to you. That's when you go to court and say, this cop was wrong, or to point out the areas that the cop failed to meet, such as being able to prove their case. Because even though the officer's opinion has weight, if you have evidence to prove that the officer's opinion was wrong or in violation, that's your chance to speak up and let the judge know. Because like I said, cops are not infallible, but their word holds more weight in court than yours does. And it's your job to, just like the cop has to prove that you're wrong, you have to prove that the cop is wrong. All right, so moving forward. Okay, now that we've got all that out of the way, let's go ahead and break down the Bill of Rights. Right? The first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And these aren't suggestions, they're binding limitations on government power. That includes law enforcement. That includes the courts. That includes every official that wears a badge, robe, or file. And the one thing that people misunderstand when it comes to the Bill of Rights is, well, they have the right, the Bill of Rights protects them, or the Bill of Rights guarantees their ability to do whatever. Well, let me tell you something right now. The Bill of Rights, in reality, does not guarantee you shit except the protection from unlawful government interference. The Bill of Rights is a list of restrictions on the government, saying this is what the government cannot do. Okay? And that's people misunderstand that all the time. All right? And just I can't repeat it and stress it enough. The Bill of Rights is to protect you, the citizen, from government action. All right? It tells the government what they can and cannot do to the citizenry. It tells them what laws they can and cannot make. Okay? It is a list of protections, not a list of guaranteed rights for you, the citizen. So here's a quick breakdown of what I'm talking about, okay? The First Amendment, freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. You can speak your mind, but that doesn't mean you're immune from consequences. Private platforms can silence you, but the government can't punish you just for speaking your mind, all right? But private citizens can. So get that straight. Okay, the Second Amendment, everybody knows what the Second Amendment is, okay? The right to keep and bear arms, not a license to own nukes and fully automatic machine guns, at least not yet. But it does mean your ability to defend yourself isn't subject to political moods, okay? And what that means is even though the federal government has restricted the types of firearms and weapons you're allowed to have, it doesn't prevent you from being able to defend yourself in the proper situations, okay? And even that is questionable to some gun nuts out there. So we'll see what happens with the Second Amendment in the future. It's always constantly being debated, far from being over. And here's a third. Here's one that's quite interesting. Some people say it's outdated, but it's really not. This is the Third Amendment. No forced quartering of soldiers. Okay, this basically is the foundation for privacy in your home. What you do in your house is your business. You don't have to let people in that you don't want into your house. And this is kind of where, you know, the man's home is his castle mentality comes from. This is why officers cannot just enter your home willy-nilly without a warrant or without your permission. It's your privacy, your domain. And that mentality was based on the Third Amendment for the most part. Okay. And then the Fourth Amendment, protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. This is the backbone of what we talk about right here on this show. From traffic stops to house searches, this is where the battle lines are drawn. The Fourth Amendment, and so many people truly do not understand the actual limitations of the Fourth Amendment and the actual loopholes and skirt arounds that cops practice to get around the Fourth Amendment. And that's part of what this show's about also, is to tell you to be aware of the tricks of the trade that cops love to do to get out around the Fourth Amendment, to get in to search something that technically they were legal in doing, but semantics and morals get involved and it creates a question about everything. Although legally right, morally wrong type stuff. That's what this show is about. But moving forward, the Fifth Amendment, the right to remain silent, avoid self-incrimination, and due process. That's Miranda. That's double jeopardy. This is why you shut up when they say anything you say can be used against you. But here's another thing, too, that a lot of people don't understand about Miranda. Supreme courts have told law enforcement officers, investigators, detectives, and attorneys there is a time and a place that Miranda must be invoked. And that's a key phrase, invoked, okay? You have a right to remain silent. Yes, you must verbally tell the cops or whoever's interrogating you, I am not going to answer any questions. I'm exercising my right to remain silent. Now, here's another thing that people don't understand. Avoid self-incrimination. And we're going to get into greater details on future episodes. But the self-incrimination is you also have to ask the cops to a lawyer. You tell the officers, I want an attorney. Not, do you think I need one or I think I should have one? No, specifically ask for a lawyer. All questioning must stop. And, of course, due process, there's certain procedures and steps that everybody have to go through, yada, yada, yada. Like I said, we're going to get into Fifth Amendment. That's an episode in and of its own, so I'm not going to get into a whole lot of details right here. But bottom line is right here. When the cops say anything you say can be used against you, they sure as shit mean it. So be quiet, express your right to remain silent. We'll keep going. So on the Sixth Amendment, the right to a speedy trial, the right to a lawyer, and to confront witnesses. You have the right to a lawyer. If you can't afford one, one is provided. But you better ask for one and clearly, as I just said. The Fifth and Sixth Amendments are tied together in the Miranda warnings. So, like I said, everybody knows the Miranda warnings, but not everybody completely understands them or how to properly apply them. Okay, the Seventh Amendment, right to trial by jury in civil cases. Not often relevant in criminal law, but still matters when your rights are on the line in court, period. You have a right to a trial by jury in a civil case. In other words, if somebody is suing you, in court, you have the legal right to have your hearing heard in front of a jury, or you can just do what's called a bench trial, which is just presided over by a judge. It's really your choice. Okay, and then the 10th Amendment, powers not given to the feds belong to the states of the people. This is where state law kicks in and where things start to diverge, okay? So bottom line is this. It's like the federal government has the amendments, which are guidelines to protect you, the citizen, from actions of the government, but also leaves it open for the states to create their own laws and guidelines within the Constitution to protect you even more from local government. Because up until the 10th Amendment was ratified, the Constitution only applied to federal statutes, federal laws. Local cops could do whatever the hell they wanted. But then the Constitution was amended from federal law enforcement down to local law enforcement to include state, county, and police. But we'll get into all that in a future episode. So, all right, so let's move forward. This next segment is something that people screw up constantly, and that is not knowing and understanding the difference between a protected right and a just law. There's a difference between protected rights and granted laws, okay? The right to move freely is protected under the Constitution. It's tied to liberty and due process. Okay. Then you have women's rights, abortion access, driver's licenses, even voting rights. These are all legal constructs that depend on federal, state, and local laws. They're not all protected in the same way as the Bill of Rights. All right? If something is a right, it's protected from government interference. If it's a law, it's created by the government, and it can be changed, repealed, or ignored by bad people, by bad cops. But understanding that difference is everything. It's key, okay, to understanding your rights. You don't have a right to own a car. You don't have a right to be liked or respected. But you do have a right to not be searched without probable cause. You do have a right to remain silent. You do have a right to legal representation. Okay? When most people throw around phrases like, I have a right to not be offended, you're confusing feelings with freedoms. And that is dangerous. Okay? And it's one of those things where just because you have a right to do something, it doesn't always necessarily mean that you should do it. So you have the freedom of speech doesn't mean you can run into a crowded theater and yell fire. Doesn't work that way. All right? Our laws are basically a list of action versus reaction. It's saying not a single law on the books tells you what you cannot do. It tells you what the consequences of your actions are if you do certain things. Okay? For example, if you go out and you kill somebody, you willfully take the life of another human being, which is the classic definition of homicide or murder, you can face penalties of a length of time in prison up to including life, or depending on circumstances, you can be faced with the death penalty if the death penalty is recognized in your state or jurisdiction. Okay? It's cause and effect. It doesn't say you can't kill somebody unless you're following the 10 Commandments and that's your way of life. Great. But from a legally speaking standpoint, not a single law on the book says you cannot do something. It tells you that if you do certain things, you will face certain punishments or consequences. It's action versus reaction, cause and effect. That's what the laws are all about. All right? And so people says, oh, you're breaking the law. I was like, okay, it's semantics. Are you breaking the law? No, because there's a law out there that says you can't do something. What's happening is you're acting in a manner which has negative consequences for your actions. Hope that explains it. But it's law enforcement, as I said earlier, is a gray area. It's all open to interpretation. Sometimes we get it wrong. Even I get it wrong. And sometimes I misinterpret things too, but I do my best to try and interpret things as it's written. Try to get my mind inside the mind of the people who created it or made the opinion to understand what they were talking about. So, but you need to know the difference between a right and a law. And another thing too, let's digress. Let's go back a little ways to the pandemic when everybody had mask mandates, okay? You were seeing on the media all the time, people being arrested for refusing to wear masks. No, they weren't. All right? What was happening is private businesses were demanding their customers wear masks to enter their establishment. When that customer refused to wear the mask, they were asked to leave, which is perfectly allowed under the Constitution and what's called innkeeper's rights and stuff like that. Customer did not want them in their store unless they agreed to wear a mask. Customer refused. Customer was asked to leave. Customer refused to leave. And at that point in time, the customer was arrested for, get this, trespassing. They weren't arrested for not refusing to wear a mask. They were arrested for trespassing. And again, they were arrested based on a consequence of their action. One action led to another, which led to another consequence. So, refusing to wear a mask inside a store after the shopkeeper said no. Refusing to leave after the shopkeeper asked to leave. That constitutes trespassing. And that's what they were arrested for. But the media blows it all up, and I blame them. You're going to hear me bash on the mainstream media a lot because that's where a lot of the misunderstanding comes from. But they were arrested for trespassing, not for refusing to wear a mask. Same thing with these quote-unquote mostly peaceful protests. There is nothing peaceful about a riot. That's just the media putting their spin on it, all right? There's a huge difference between a peaceful protest and a riot because the Constitution guarantees your right to peaceably assemble, your right to assemble peaceably, which means you're on a street corner, you're holding up your sign, you're getting your word out. You're not interfering with the freedom of movement of other people. You're not jamming up a highway and protecting traffic from moving. Those are unlawful acts, okay? So if you're taking over an intersection with your protest and you're being arrested, you're not being arrested for protesting. You're being arrested for interfering with the traffic. That is against the law pretty much everywhere. So don't go out and quote-unquote break the law and then try to hide behind the Constitution's protected act because your right to protest is protected. Your right to block somebody else's access is not. So let's get that straight too. And a current thing about this whole flag burning thing that Trump is supposed to do, okay? According to the media, Donald Trump, and I didn't mean to get political here, but it kind of falls into what I'm talking about, the difference between a right and a law. The Supreme Court has ruled many times that the right to burn the flag is protected speech, freedom of expression. Great. Well, President Trump's executive order, which, by the way, is a glorified interoffice memo for the most part, but we'll get into that some other time, does not ban the burning of the flag. The actual executive order directs the Department of Justice to investigate flag burning to see if there are any other criminal actions associated with that flag burning, such as, does the person burning this flag actually own that flag, or is it somebody else's? Because if it's somebody else's property, then that person burning the flag is destroying another person's property, which is a crime. It's vandalism, okay? But the media, once again, is blowing it out of proportion. And, of course, Trump can be blamed for it, too, because what Trump is verbally saying is not exactly in line to what's actually written in the executive order. So Trump is not trying to violate the First Amendment, but what he is doing, he's trying to crack down on flag burning by people with criminal intent. All right? So there's a loophole. There's a way around things, and cops do the same damn thing. And that's part of what this show is about as well, is teaching you the loopholes, teaching you the gray areas of what cops do to get away with what they want. It's the same thing with what Trump's trying to do with the First Amendment. He's not directly trying to violate the First Amendment. He's skirting around it by trying to find criminal activity associated with the First Amendment expression. So like I said, it's the difference between a riot and a peaceful demonstration. So, all right, so I'm done beating that dead horse. Let's move forward. Okay, now that we understand the difference between a right and the law and understanding how it's applied, let's go ahead and talk about one of the most quoted and misunderstood phrases in American law. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Probably heard that 1,000 times, if not 1,000,000 times. Maybe you heard it from a cop. Maybe you heard it from a judge on TV. Or maybe from someone trying to sound smart in a bar fight they absolutely started. But here's the thing. It's not just a catchphrase. It's a legal principle, a bedrock in our justice system, and it's been upheld time and time again by the courts. The idea that you can't plead ignorance as a defense, that comes straight from United States v. International Minerals and Chemical Corps, 1971. In that case, the court didn't mince words. They said, quote, "The principle that ignorance of the law is no excuse is deep in our law, and ignorance of the law is typically no defense to criminal prosecution," end quote. So let me translate that for you from Supreme Court speak. It basically says, just because you didn't know it was illegal doesn't mean you get a free pass. But it goes deeper than that. This isn't a new concept. It's ancient. The Latin phrase ignorantia juris non excusat literally translates to ignorance of the law excuses not. It's been a part of Anglo-American legal tradition for over 200 years. Why? Because the courts have always held that if people could claim, "I didn't know," every time they got caught doing something illegal, the law would be meaningless. It'd be like playing Monopoly where everyone gets to rewrite the rules mid-game. It'd be total chaos. It would be like living in the Wild West again before law got established. It would be survival of the fittest or survival of the strongest. We need laws to maintain a civilized society, to keep us from playing gladiator on the streets. It's all about accountability. But here's where it gets interesting. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. has always been known for boiling legal concepts down to one-liners that still have a punch today. He once said, quote, "Even a dog distinguishes between being stumbled over and being kicked," end quote. What does that mean? It means intent. Intent matters. But awareness of the law, that's still on us. We don't get to say, "Oh, I didn't know I couldn't carry a loaded Glock into the post office," or "Nobody told me I couldn't search that guy's bag." And you damn sure don't get to argue, "Well, I thought it was legal because nobody stopped me before." That's basically saying, "Well, I didn't get caught last time, so I'm going to keep doing it and didn't know it was illegal." That's not how the system works, all right? And this applies to everyone, not just civilians, but to civilians and law enforcement. Then somebody might argue, "Well, cops get qualified immunity, so they can do whatever they want." Yes and no. It's a gray area. Sure, cops get qualified immunity, but only when the law wasn't clearly established. We don't get that safety net. The courts assumed we should know the law, or at least have the common sense to figure it out. And with the internet literally in our pockets, it's right there. So ignorance of the law today is an even bigger issue because it is literally in our pocket. If you're not sure it's the law, then it's our responsibility to look it up. So now, before you go burning your pocket constitution and calling me a sellout, let me tell you about the exception to the rule. Because yes, there is one major asterisk here. It's a case that throws a wrench into the whole "you should have known better" doctrine. And it is Lambert v. California, 1957. Here's what happened. A woman living in Los Angeles gets picked up and charged for failing to register as a convicted felon, which was required under a local city ordinance. The problem was she had no idea that the law existed. There were no signs, no letters, no public notices, nothing. Zip, zilt, zero, nada. She did not know. She had to report. But more importantly, there was no reasonable way, key phrase there, no reasonable way for her to have known. 1957, they didn't have the internet back then. So what does that tell you? And the Supreme Court actually agreed with her. All right. They ruled that her conviction violated due process because the law was so obscure, so hidden, that punishing her for not knowing was flat out unconstitutional. But here's the key phrase here. Not only is reasonable important, but notice is important. Okay? If there's a law and it's been reasonably communicated, you're expected to follow it. But if the law is buried in some dusty city code with no warning, no notice, and no effort to inform the public, that's not enforcement, that's entrapment. So let's be clear. Lambert v. California is the exception, not the rule. But most laws, we're expected to know them. We can't plead dumb in court just because our civics teacher sucked or TikTok said otherwise. But it does prove something important. You can't be punished for breaking a law that doesn't clearly exist, period. Which brings me to this. Let's talk about murder. The most obvious, heinous, no-brainer crime there is. Everyone knows it's illegal. It's in the Bible. It's in every movie. It's the go-to moral line in the sand. But here's what nobody talks about. Murder wasn't even a federal crime in the United States until fairly recently. For most of U.S. history, murder was strictly a state-level offense. If you killed someone, the feds had no jurisdiction, unless it happened on federal property, to a federal official, or involved crossing state lines. That's it. Those were the only three requirements for federal jurisdiction. That means no FBI, no U.S. Marshals, no federal charges. Murder wasn't illegal because it's wrong. It was illegal because the state you were in wrote a law that said it was. And that state had the power to enforce it. The federal government didn't get involved until much later, especially after the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, when things like hate crimes, terrorism, and cross-border offenses got added under federal jurisdiction. So here's the takeaway. Laws aren't about morality. They're about jurisdiction, notice, and enforcement. You can't be punished for something if, 1, there's no law in the books, 2, the law is so vague or obscure that no reasonable person would know about it, or 3, the government doesn't have the authority to charge you in the first place. That's why the law doesn't say you can't do this. It says if you do this, here's what happens. It's not a list of commandments, it's a list of consequences. Okay? It's a list of saying, we can't restrict your freedom of movement. We can't control free will. We can't tell you what to think, what you can think. But what we can do is tell you what the consequences of your actions are. So if you go out and kill somebody, that means the consequences of your action of willfully taking another human being is going to be a 25 to life sentence if, under the right circumstances, we don't sentence you to death if that's still a thing where you live. So as I said, and I can't enforce this enough or stress this enough, our laws are not commandments, they're consequences. It's cause and effect. Justice is about what's right. Law is about what's written and whether you had fair warning. That is what it is. All right, now that we've covered ignorance of the law is not an excuse, let's talk about one of the dumbest, most dangerous trends to ever crawl out of the internet sewer and into a courtroom. And they've been around a hell of a lot longer than the internet is. They've just come to be more recognized since the invent of the internet. And that is the sovereign citizen movement. Yep, those people. The ones who think they can outsmart the system by saying, I do not consent, or I'm not driving, I'm traveling. And my personal favorite, I don't recognize your authority. Well, guess what? The system doesn't need your permission to work. Sovereign citizens are just ignorant enough to be dangerous to themselves, to officers, and to everyone who actually understands what rights really are. They throw around nonsense terms like free man on the land, admiralty court, and common law jurisdiction as if saying magic words turns them into wizards immune from arrest. Let's get one thing clear. None of that bullshit holds up in court. Not one single bit. You can print all the fake license plates you want. You can print all the homemade legal documents you want. You're still getting pulled over. You're still going to jail. And you're still losing in court. These ass clowns are the flat earthers of criminal law. They act like if they just say the right phrase, boom, immunity unlocked, like some level in a video game. Newsflash, this isn't Hogwarts. You're not casting spells. You're just embarrassing yourself and setting yourself up for felony charges. And worse, you're screwing it up for everyone else who's actually trying to challenge real overreach with facts, case law, and logic. Because when a cop hears I'm a sovereign citizen, they don't think, oh, wow, this person is educated. No. They're thinking, great, another asshole that wants to fight. And you know what? They're right. These encounters escalate fast. Windows get broken, tasers come out, people get hurt, and sometimes people get killed. I can tell you from personal experience, 8, maybe even 9 times out of 10, a contact with a sovereign citizen usually ended up with a use of force and them going to jail. So just because some jackass read a Reddit thread somewhere and decided they knew more than 250 years of constitutional law, let's cut the crap. You don't get to use public roads, enjoy public protection, file lawsuits in public courts, and then claim you're somehow above the very system you rely on. That's not patriotism. That's cowardice wrapped in delusion. If you really want to fight government abuse, great. So do I. But do it with your brain, not your ego. Learn the law, know the rights, and stop thinking TikTok is a damn law school. Because when the cuffs go on, that YouTube video, it's not going to save you. Your fake ID, not going to save you. And your 5-minute Google search won't stop a judge from laughing you out of the courtroom. Sovereign citizens aren't rebels. They're liabilities. And the reason the rest of us have to fight twice as hard to be taken seriously. All right, so here's the bottom line in a nutshell of everything we just talked about. The Constitution doesn't exist to tell you what you're allowed to do. It exists to tell the government what they're not allowed to do to you. That's what the Bill of Rights really is. Not a permission slip for citizens, but a leash on government power. Not a list of freedoms they hand out, but a set of hard lines they're not supposed to cross. And here's where most people get it twisted. No law actually says you can't do this. What it does say is, if you do this, here's what happens. It's not about banning behavior. It's about attaching accountability to behavior. Let's take murder. The law doesn't say you're not allowed to kill. It says if you kill someone and it's not legally justified, you're going to prison, maybe forever. It's not a prohibition, it's a consequence. Same with theft, same with assault. The law isn't a rule book saying don't do this. It's a contract that lays out what happens if you do and get caught. That's how freedom works. You can do almost anything you want. You just have to be ready to face the result. And that's why this show exists, to teach you where the lines really are, what your rights truly protect, and how to navigate that balance between freedom and responsibility. Because when you know your rights, when you really understand how the system is supposed to work, you don't just protect yourself, you force the system to respect you. So let me leave you with this. The Bill of Rights, codified law, it all comes down to cause and effect, action and reaction. Do something, there's a response. That's the deal. We are a nation of laws, not of men. That means no single person gets to decide what's right or wrong on a whim. It means the rules are supposed to apply equally, whether you wear a badge, a robe, or handcuffs. Rights aren't just ideas on paper, they're the counterweight to unchecked power. And then if you don't understand them, if you can't exercise them, you're walking into a gunfight with a stick. With all that being said, we are about out of time. If you enjoyed the show and want to connect with us, you can find all our episodes and more at www.showconmedia.com. Check out our merch store if you'd like to support the show, and feel free to email us at wytdm@showconmedia.com. Once again, that's wytdm@showconmedia.com with any questions or comments. Until next time, be good, be safe, and always remember, what you think doesn't matter.